investigation on the part of Israel.
Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Cave's mouth. Alright, I don't know if you can see it, but to the left of her, I've drawn in with some very light white paint, or very thin white paint, a figure to be silhouetted that will be the second figure in the composition. I've mixed up over here a little, where's my finger? A little phthalo green, Naples yellow with some white, some lemon yellow to work on her edges, some black for the figure, and so I'm just going to continue playing with this for a little while here. Let's see what comes of this session.
Ultimately looked for that possibility, but we were told that policy impacts whether they take that on, and that even if there were prosecution of someone would be extremely unlikely through the U.S. So it's one of the reasons that we are saying there needs to be an international element here, an international commitment to ensuring that an unbiased investigation happens, that an impartial investigation happens. We ultimately went to the Israeli courts, which we learned are also implicated in furthering Israeli policy and occupation. And we heard the lead investigator who completed the military investigation, and it's important for people to understand Israel's investigations are military investigations. It became clear that that was conducted in order to exonerate the Israeli military, not to find truth and what really happened, and that's what our family was pursuing. But the lead investigator stated under oath in Haifa court that he believed that they were at war with everyone, including the peace activists from the International Solidarity Movement. I think that's really important information for people to understand now as we move forward in this tragic case.
I want to end with the words of Congressmember Pramila Jayapal of Washington, who's head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the largest caucus in Congress, on the killing of the Turkish-American activist Ayşenur Ezgi. She said, "I'm very troubled by the reports she was killed by Israeli Defense Forces soldiers. The Netanyahu government has done nothing to stop settlement expansion and settler violence in the West Bank, often encouraged by right-wing ministers of the Netanyahu government. The killing of an American citizen is a terrible proof point in this senseless war of rising tensions in the region," she said. I want to thank you all for being with us. Rachel's parents, Cindy and Craig Corey, speaking to us more than 2 decades after Rachel was killed by an Israeli military bulldozer in Gaza near Rafah. I want to thank Amados Hassan, Filipino-American, shot and led by Israeli forces a month ago today in Beta, where Ayşenur was also killed. Juliet Majid, PhD student, North Carolina State University, speaking to us from Raleigh. Dear friend of Ayşenur Ezgi at the University of Washington, where they both graduated. Coming up, we look at the raids in Jenin. We'll speak with the Palestinian journalist Mariam Barghouti. Stay with us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. We return now to the occupied West Bank, where Israeli soldiers stormed the city of Tulkarem just after midnight today, in new raids that come just days after Israeli forces withdrew from Tulkarem and Jenin. Israeli troops also raided the Balata refugee camp in the northern West Bank earlier today and in Abu Shaitim near Ramallah. All Al Jazeera reports Israeli forces were seen raiding homes. On Friday, Israeli forces temporarily retreated from Jenin, Tulkarem, and other areas in the occupied West Bank after laying siege to the cities for 10 days, killing dozens of Palestinians, including children and elders, and leaving a trail of destruction. Simultaneous raids also took place across Nablus, Bethlehem, Hebron, and Ramallah, in the largest Israeli military occupation in the occupied West Bank in 2 decades, with hundreds of troops backed by armored vehicles, bulldozers, fighter jets, and drones. During the raids, Israeli soldiers fired live rounds at Palestinian journalists, documenting the attacks, injuring at least 4 of them in the town of Kafr Dam. Footage also surfaced of Israeli forces in an armored tank rolling over the dead body of an 82-year-old Palestinian man in Jenin who was killed Friday by Israeli soldiers and denied medical attention. Meanwhile, Israeli settlers continued their attacks in the West Bank. In Kiryat, near Nablus, a 13-year-old Palestinian girl was killed by Israeli gunfire as settlers attacked the village. Bana Laboum was hit by a bullet Friday while she was in her bedroom. Her mother described the Israeli attack ahead of her daughter's burial.
She was in her room along with her sisters. She was afraid, in fear, and suddenly a bullet got in through the window and hit her while she was on her bed. This is what happened. There were scuffles outside with the youth, but we were surprised that a bullet came through the window and onto her.
Over 650 Palestinians have been killed in the occupied West Bank since October, nearly 150 of them children, most of them during near daily raids by the Israeli military. That's added on to the more than
also, of course,
all right, here we go again. Forgot to check my battery before I started. It
so can you
quit on me.
describe what
So
Jenin was
continuing
like
with
and the level
sun
of destruction
circle
left
thing.
behind? Palestinians in the camp describe being forced out of their homes by gunpoint.
Yes, so Jenin has been under constant attack by the Israeli military for the past 2 years specifically, but generally across time in Palestine. But we have seen an intensification. So every other month, the Israeli military would actually invade Jenin refugee camp and carry out lethal attacks against its community. But this time, what we have seen is the brutality is truly unprecedented. The Israeli military, not just in the camp, but even on the outskirts, went into civilian buildings and at gunpoint forced families out of their homes to places unknown, to a fate unknown. They didn't know where they will sleep, how long they will be away from their houses, and when they returned on Friday to their homes after the Israeli withdrawal, what I saw was complete destruction of their homes and their apartments. The furniture was ruined, mattresses, they had dung on them. There were attack dogs that were put in these homes. The refrigerators would be destroyed. There would be Hebrew graffiti on the walls. And inside the camp, it's truly very difficult to capture it in words. I just saw families cleaning up the rubble, cleaning up the trash left behind by the Israeli military. The walls are full of bullets. It's just rubble all over the ground. It's so difficult to walk. Cars can't move within the camp. And the families, when I would ask them, are you going to rebuild? What are you going to do now? They would respond with, why would we rebuild now if the Israeli army is only going to come for another invasion, as we have seen happen in Tulkarem last night. Again, after a withdrawal from Tulkarem refugee camp, the Israeli military just kept going back. So people are frightened, they feel abandoned, they have zero protection, and again, in an impoverished area to rebuild, which is going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to rebuild the infrastructure, it's truly a cost and a toll. And clearly it is put to cripple Palestinian civil society.
Mariam, can you explain who is the Jenin Brigade? What's their role in Jenin versus the security forces affiliated with the Palestinian Authority?
Right. So in Jenin refugee camp, to what the Israeli military dubs as the wasp's nest, we have seen a rise of Palestinian armed youth groups starting within 2021 until today. And these are small battalions. These are youth that grew up in the camp. Many of them have been imprisoned by Israel under administrative detention, meaning no trial, no charge, only torture. And they decided to take up arms, essentially, because they found that across the last decade, any efforts of Palestinians, whether it is in negotiations or whether it is in unarmed and nonviolent confrontation, has only allowed Israel to continue its expansion of settlements on Palestinian lands and continue its escalation of violence on Palestinians. So they see themselves as the force that is trying to push back. Even though they're limited in resources, they're protecting their homes. And please remember that these are the refugees that essentially Israel and its militia, its Zionist militias, had kicked out of their original homes in 1948 that are located within heartland Palestine, or what is now Israel. The difference between them and the Palestinian Authority is that the Palestinian Authority, which has been given the role of an administrative role under
We just
the
have
Oslo
15
Accords,
seconds.
has actually done nothing. Has done nothing to protect Palestinians, and actually during the siege remained within the headquarters, letting Palestinian families just being bombed constantly throughout the siege.
Mariam Barghouti, Palestinian writer and journalist, will link to your piece for 972 magazine, Inside the Brutal Siege of Jenin. Part 2 online at democracynow.org, when we ask her what it's like to be a journalist reporting on Jenin.
All right, I might check that out. Let's see.
We've learned new details about the mother of the alleged gunman in last week's school shooting in Winder, Georgia. So 4 people were killed and 9 others were injured.
Now, the mother called the school the morning of the attack to warn administrators about her son. Appalachian High School will remain closed while the investigation continues.
With us now is Chase McGee of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Chase, what can you tell us about the phone call the alleged shooter's mother made?
Yeah, so Marcy Gray is the mother of the alleged 14-year-old gunman, Colt. Text messages surfaced over the weekend about conversations that she had with her sister, Colt's aunt, about a phone call she made to the high school, and she was worried about her son. She'd apparently received some alarming messages from him that morning. So she called a school counselor and spoke to that person about 10 minutes, about 30 minutes before the shooting started. And administrators seemed to take that call seriously. We know someone went to go to a classroom where he was supposed to be, but he wasn't there. So then the school administrator leaves, and it's not much later that the alleged gunman tried to enter that classroom, but was prevented because there was a locked door in between him and the class.
Okay, so administrators did act. Did they do enough, though, to react?
Yeah, I'll say, since these text messages have come to light, the school district and other educators have referred questions to authorities.
All right, next step.
But we know from witnesses inside
drop
the
in
school
some,
that the school might not
ground
have
outside the
locked down
cave.
as quickly as they could have.
I want it
There was
light,
also some
bright,
confusion
glowing
because
along
there
with
was
the rest of
another
it. So this is
student
going to be
with
multiple
similar name
glazes.
happened to be in that same
So this is
algebra
just kind of
class,
started out.
but wasn't there when the
all the
administrator
same.
came in after the
Get it
phone
right.
call with the suspect's mother.
I'm gonna take a
And
little
I'll
of this
say
maple
there's still a lot of unanswered questions.
a little
We're
of this
hoping this
lemon.
next week will give us some clarity as the investigation moves forward.
So on that investigation, what do things stand?
Yeah, last Friday we saw the alleged gunman appear in court along with his father. The son is charged with murder and will be tried as an adult. He is 14 years old, and the maximum sentence for him would be life in prison. Like I mentioned, the boy's father also had his day in court. He was arrested Thursday night, the day after the shootings. He's being charged with murder because he bought the gun for his son that was allegedly used in those shootings. And they're both currently being held in state custody. We're expecting to hear that they'll have new legal counsel representing them soon. Their next court appearance isn't until early December, and we're waiting to hear more from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They're leading up the investigation on this case.
Yeah, it's been 5 days since the shooting. I mean, how are people doing there?
Well, I'll say it's really tough. One thing we heard from people right after the shooting is that this isn't the kind of thing that happens in Winder. And we've heard that after mass shootings across the U.S. There's been a number of vigils, and yesterday we saw church sermons where pastors reflected on the difficult moments and the immediate aftermath, but also the really difficult couple weeks to come. In Winder, the state is opening what's called a community recovery center today. People can go there for spiritual and mental health care. There will be representatives from several faith-based organizations. But the wounds of what happened are running really deep. And it's not just for people who were inside the school, it's the hundreds or thousands of others traumatized by what happened this past week.
Georgia Public Broadcasting's James McGee, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The candidate who is widely believed to have won the July presidential election in Venezuela is no longer in the country.
Edmundo Gonzalez was facing arrest for challenging the results of that election, defying authorities. Instead of being arrested, he flew to Spain over the weekend, where he has been granted political asylum.
Reporter John Otis has been covering the story. Joins us now. John, Gonzalez appeared to have won the election by a landslide, but instead of moving into the palace, he fled to Spain. So what happened?
Yeah, it's quite a twist. Most electoral observers believe Gonzalez won the July 28 election. In fact, the opposition published voter tally sheets showing Gonzalez leading President Nicolás Maduro by a 2-to-1 margin. And the problem is that Maduro controls all branches of power in Venezuela and is backed by the military. He could also face arrest overseas for drug trafficking and other crimes if he were to actually step down. So Maduro simply declared that he won the election, and then he launched a brutal crackdown on the opposition. His regime has now jailed more than 2,000 people, and they were about to arrest Gonzalez, who hid out in the Spanish embassy in Caracas.
So how did he manage to get out?
Well, there were a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations, and then over the weekend, the Maduro regime came out with a statement saying Gonzalez could leave the country. So then, along with his wife, he boarded a Spanish military aircraft and flew to Madrid. And once there, he released this brief message to his followers. So here Gonzalez is saying, my departure from Caracas was surrounded by acts of pressure, coercion, and threats. I trust that we will soon continue our fight for freedom and the restoration of Venezuelan democracy.
So how can he do that if he's now in exile?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Gonzalez joins an ever-expanding group of exiled Venezuelans who've gone to Spain. That includes 4 previous presidential hopefuls. But once politicians leave, it usually means that they're gone for good. It's starting to resemble Cuba's exile community that's based in Miami but has really very little political influence on the island. So in the end, the Maduro regime, it may be that they're quite pleased that Gonzalez is no longer inside of Venezuela.
But is there anyone left inside Venezuela that maybe can fight for democracy?
There's still Maria Corina Machado. Remember, she was going to be the opposition presidential candidate, but she was banned from running and selected Gonzalez as her last stand-in. Machado has gone into
I think we need some rocks.
She's also been
I'm going
making
to palette
some
knife them
dramatic
on initially and then
appearances
blend them
at
up.
opposition
Not sure
rallies.
exactly
However, at this
which
point, the opposition
tone
really
I
is up
want to
against
use,
the
though. I
wall.
think I'll go
They
with
were
the
hoping the US
more
and other
lemon
countries
into
would
the
recognize Gonzalez as
peachish tone there.
new president-elect.
Let's see what that
But
does.
now that seems out of the question, now that he's out of the country.
And it seems like that all adds up to Maduro being around for a while.
Yeah, that's exactly what it does look like. Despite his dismal showing at the polls, Maduro is insisting that he won another 6-year term. And that's on top of his ruling party already controlling Venezuela for the past quarter century.
That's John Otis, who's been reporting on Venezuela for us. John, thank you.
Thanks.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling to London today.
Yeah, the United States and the United Kingdom have what they call a special relationship, and it's true around the world. The US, UK, and 3 former British colonies form the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Group. The UK and Australia are key US allies facing China, and the US and UK work together to arm Ukraine. But when it comes to Israel, UK has recently taken some actions that differ from its allies.
Which NPR's Lauren Freyer is following from our bureau in London. Lauren, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
So what's changing in this relationship?
Well, there's been a change of government here. Conservatives were in charge of the UK for the past 14 years. That is until July, when Keir Starmer's centre-left Labour Party won an election and took over. Now, Starmer's politics are pretty closely aligned with the Biden and a prospective Harris administration. And so the US is now like, game on. We finally have a like-minded partner here. But then, a week ago today, there was a bit of a divergence.
Which was what?
Just say game on.
So the UK suspended some of its arms exports to its ally Israel. The US also at one point withheld and then resumed shipments of some big bombs to Israel. But the UK cited Israel's conduct in Gaza, said there's a risk that Israel might use British-made weapons to violate international humanitarian law. Israel, of course, denies breaking any laws with its military offensive in Gaza. But Starmer's done a couple other things as well. He restored funding to the UN aid agency helping Palestinians. His government has said it will not interfere with the International Criminal Court's efforts to request arrest warrants for Israeli officials. So all of those things put Starmer's foreign policy on a slightly different track than Washington's. And they could come up in Blinken's meetings here.
Well, given those differences in approach, what are the two sides saying about this visit by Anthony
Kill all the
Blinken?
artists and wonder why there's no imagination in the
This a
Republican Party.
crisis trip. Not at all, just the opposite. The State Department says he's here to
they don't kill them in
reaffirm the
this country.
special
Just ban them from
relationship.
Facebook.
I mean, case in
Banish them
point,
to
this
obscurity.
weekend, the head of the CIA and the head of Britain's MI6 intelligence agency did a public event together. This is unprecedented.
Yeah.
Here's what CIA Director Bill Burns said. This was at a Financial Times conference, talking about US-UK intelligence sharing.
This is a moment when those partnerships in a very complicated and contested world matters more than ever.
And the spy chiefs together also talked at that conference about what they've learned through intelligence sharing. They said that Ukraine's offensive inside Russia's Kursk region has rattled Russian elites. That's what they're picking up, that it could be a game changer. They also talked about new Gaza ceasefire proposals being prepared within days.
Okay, so they said this is not a crisis visit, that's fine, but CIA Director Bill Burns goes where there is a crisis. He shows up in Afghanistan, he shows up in Moscow, various places like that over the years. Now he goes to London, then Blinken is on his way, so why so much focus on the UK now?
I mean, the UK had years of turmoil. Steve, you'll remember the Brexit years, the years of Boris Johnson. But the UK now looks like a really stable ally, especially at a time when we're seeing the far right surging in places like France and Germany. Starmer is actually heading to the White House later this week for his second visit in as many months. The backdrop is Russia's war in Ukraine, and real threats to liberal democracy across the world. The US and the UK say they're working together against those to defend democracy, and that's what these visits are about.
NPR's Lauren Freyer is in London. Thanks as always for your reporting.
You're welcome.
We have a political story from which nobody will be able to flee this week. Vice President Harris meets former President Trump in a debate. They'll be in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is widely seen as the most important state on the electoral map, and it will be covered, the ABC debate, will be covered on many networks, including NPR News. To begin our coverage,
which
we
arms
called in
industry
two former
sponsored it?
White House speechwriters. Mary Kate Carey
Arms
worked for
Industry
President
Network,
George H.W. Bush.
CBS,
Good morning.
NBC, ABC,
Good morning.
ABC.
And glad you're with us. And Paul Orszalak joins us once again. He worked for President
New
Clinton.
owner of
Good morning to
Lockheed
you.
Martin.
Morning, Steve.
Paul, last time we talked, you had a different candidate on your side. How different does it feel now?
Well, who would have guessed that the word weird would become the biggest political word of the year, but that's where we are now.
It's weird that this has happened, but go on.
But, if you watched the convention in Chicago, you saw the total change in disposition among Democrats. Instead of kind of darkness and what we're against, it was about joy and freedom and what we're for, and now the race is neck and neck, and we see surging new registration, and it's a whole new race.
Although I want to note something here, Kamala Harris really improved in polling compared to Joe Biden up until the convention, and then something, I don't know if something's happened or nothing has happened. She hasn't really had a big convention bounce.
I think the pollsters haven't really polled since the end of the convention and Labor Day. I think they're waiting for after the debate to see. But I think we are seeing a bounce certainly in the battleground states, where she's sort of surged up by 2 or 3 points in a lot of these races. But everything is close.
Okay, Mary Kate, what do you make of the matchup as a Republican?
I think this is going to be a fascinating night tomorrow night. I think it's a make or break especially for Harris. And to your point about the polling, I think just in the last 24 hours, the big New York Times Siena poll came out that maybe some of our listeners aren't aware of, but that asked three big takeaways. What's the most important issue to you? And whatever the answer was that the people gave, open-ended, Trump led by 5 points as who is better on that issue.
Coming from Truth Social Media.
Trump is not too far to the left or right, but nearly half say that Harris is too far to the left. And most interesting, he's viewed as the agent of change in this election. And that's kind of a big deal because she was trying to portray herself as the agent of change.
Let's see who wins.
Moving forward, new page, all this, and it sounds like it's not sinking in with voters.
Well,
Go ahead, Paul.
if I may, William, I don't know, is that really true? I mean, Donald Trump has sort of been in our everyday life for 9 years. Nobody can escape his voice. And to think that he's the agent of change and she's not remains to be seen. But people, I think, are definitely going to tune in tomorrow night to see her and not so much to see him. You know, candidates...
Well, let me stop you there for a second, Paul. I mean, I understand exactly the argument you're making. It sounds like, at least in this one survey, the argument isn't working with a number of voters who see Harris, I guess, as part of the current administration. And I've noticed, I mean, sometimes when you interview younger voters, they barely remember the past Trump administration.
I know that's one of the things that she really needs to do is to remind people that the end of the Trump administration was the worst economic performance in history, but they don't know her. I mean, I think that same Siena poll shows that nearly 30% of voters don't have a good feel for her, which is why they want to show up tomorrow night to see, you know, can she go toe-to-toe with him? Can she attack and counterattack the way that people look for in debates to make, you know, to understand what's important to you, what's important to the other side. We didn't think President Biden could make that case. I think Kamala Harris will make that case.
Mary Kate, what do you make of Harris's efforts to lean toward the center a little bit? The most obvious case being that once upon a time she was against fracking and now she's for it.
Yeah, there's a whole string of issues that she has changed her positions on. Fracking, the border, even plastic straws, I think came out over the weekend. But this reminds me, a little throwback here, this reminds me from the 1988 campaign. We called it the Dukakis Dilemma. And the Dukakis Dilemma was that when Mike Dukakis would talk generalities, he would be criticized for being vague, that's what's happening with her. But when he talks specifics, either he shows that he's out of sync with the American mainstream, or he has to flip-flop to get to not alienate voters. And I feel like that's exactly what's going on here. That she has these word salads, as everybody calls them, and so she's criticized for being vague.
You mean complete sentences?
She says what she really
You stupid
believes,
fucking
she has to
twat.
flip-flop because she realized she's out of sync.
Word salads, that's
Let
great.
me ask you, go ahead, Paul.
I don't think flip-flopping is very fair. I think when she was vice president for 4 years, she learned more about fracking, and she evolved her position, and, you know, the administration has more exports than the Trump administration ever did. But I would put that a different way. It's not a question of why she evolved, it's why he did it. Like when he was president during COVID, circumstances changed, and he couldn't change. He told us to drink bleach, and he lost 3 million jobs. That's the kind of counterbalance that I think we're going to see in the debate. And I think the words are going to come out.
I do want to get this on the table for both of you, and these are things that former President Trump has said recently in writing on Truth Social and elsewhere. He repeated a threat to, quote, terminate the rules in the Constitution.
Zuckerberg
Just as last weekend he was promising to arrest and imprison election officials if they get in the way of his election win, which he described as the only acceptable outcome. He has previously said he would be a dictator on day one. He's previously said before that he would terminate the Constitution or the parts of it that he doesn't like. And so I want to ask you frankly, and I'll begin with Mary Kay, just because you're Republican, how can each candidate on stage address the reality that one candidate has promised in writing to violate the oath of office?
Well, let's keep in mind that he is saying this stuff, and the campaign is not. And he has this penchant for freelancing like this. And I think that's, for him to enact any of this is going to take a lot of people to help him, whether it's changing the Constitution or getting the Justice Department to arrest people, whatever it is. I think he's a lot of bluster, and it goes to what Peggy knew.
Are you saying you don't believe him because he keeps saying it again and again and again? He tried to overturn an election. Why wouldn't you believe him?
I just think he's a lot of I don't know what the word is for it. He's a whirlwind, and I think that if people are not choosing him as a person. This is what Peggy Noonan wrote over the weekend. They're going to put up with the person, but it's the path they want, and the path we're on right now is so unsustainable to so many people.
Paul, we've got about
That's going to get fun.
Paul, you got about
I
20
think
seconds.
January 6th showed us what he's really about. Communicate. I think we can't spin this. He's the candidate. He does what he does as president. We saw that everything that he did the last administration. It didn't matter what others around him wanted to do. He's going to threaten all the same. This is all outlined in Project 2025, which is all his program.
Which
about
he's
the mass
disavowed.
deportations and other. Which was created by 100 members of administration, and which his vice president nominee wrote an introduction for, the book version of it. So, I mean, we know who he is, we know what he's about. I think people are tuning in because they want a different choice, and I think Kamala Harris is going to give them that choice. It's going to be very different after the debate.
Got to stop the discussion there, but this has been great. Let's keep talking, guys. Paul Orzelak and Mary Kate Carey, thanks to you both.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
Wow.
A candidate who is widely believed.
So instead of reporting facts, now they just report bullshit from all sides. No matter what or how stupid it is, they'll give it a cheerful tone. Love NPR. Alright, well that's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Cave's mouth. Gonna go try not to vomit from this upcoming bullshit that's gonna be across all networks soon. And do some more work today. So I hope everyone's day is well. And thanks for watching.
In fact, the opposition published voter tally sheets showing Gonzalez leading President Nicolas Maduro by a 2-to-1 margin. And the problem is that Maduro controls